The driver who carried ghostly passengers. In every city, there are stories whispered in the shadows, tales that never make it into newspapers, but circulate among taxi drivers, night shift workers, and those who wander after midnight. One of the most unsettling of these stories is about a driver who unknowingly gave rides to passengers who didn't belong to the living world. His name was Daniel, a man in his early 40s who had been driving late-night shifts for years. Daniel wasn't easily shaken. He had seen the strangest behavior from customers. Drunk brawls in the back seat, eerie silence from people staring at nothing, and countless confessions from strangers who treated the taxi as a therapist's couch. But nothing prepared him for what was about to happen. It was a cold autumn night when Daniel first encountered something unusual. The streets were covered with a thin mist, and the lamps flickered with that strange orange glow that makes everything look distorted. Business had been slow, and he was tired, sipping from his lukewarm coffee as he drove aimlessly around the outskirts of the city. That was when he saw her. A young woman standing by the roadside, wearing a pale dress that looked almost out of place for the season. She didn't wave, didn't signal. She just stood there, staring at the approaching car. Something inside Daniel told him not to stop, but as if guided by an invisible force, he pulled over. She opened the back door and quietly slipped inside. The interior light flickered for a brief second when she entered, though Daniel assumed it was just a wiring issue in the old cab. "Where to?" he asked, adjusting his mirror to see her face. But the mirror seemed foggy, as if her reflection didn't fully register. The woman finally whispered an address, her voice so faint that Daniel strained to hear it. It was an old neighborhood, one he vaguely recognized but rarely drove through. He shrugged and pulled away, the tires crunching on the damp asphalt. The ride was silent. Too silent. Daniel tried making small talk, commenting on the weather, asking if she had been waiting long, but she gave no response. Her eyes stayed fixed on the window, staring at the passing darkness as though searching for something that wasn't there. The air inside the car grew colder, and Daniel noticed his breath starting to fog the glass, though the heater was running. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, forcing himself to ignore the creeping unease crawling up his spine. When he finally reached the address she had given, he slowed to a stop. The house looked abandoned, its windows boarded, and the front yard overgrown with weeds. Daniel turned to tell her they had arrived, but the back seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. There had been no sound of footsteps. She had simply vanished. For a long moment, Daniel sat frozen, heart pounding in his chest. He checked the locks, the seats, even stepped out of the car with a flashlight, but there was no trace of her. Yet, when he glanced at the back seat, he noticed something chilling. A faint imprint on the leather seat, as if someone had been sitting there moments ago. That was the first night, and it would not be the last. Daniel tried to rationalize the experience. He told himself it must have been fatigue, an overworked mind creating illusions in the dim light. After all, he'd been driving for almost 12 hours straight, and exhaustion could play cruel tricks. But deep down, he knew it was different. There was a heaviness in his chest, a sense of dread that clung to him even after he went home. He barely slept that night, and when he did, he dreamt of pale figures whispering in the corners of his room, their words unintelligible but filled with sorrow. Still, he couldn't afford to miss work. The next night, Daniel was back behind the wheel. The city at night was alive in its own strange way. Clubs throbbed with music, neon lights flickered against wet pavement, and alleyways echoed with laughter and shouts. Yet for Daniel, every shadow felt heavier. Every face in the crowd seemed slightly off, like masks hiding something beneath. He kept checking his mirrors, half expecting to see someone sitting there uninvited. Around 2 a.m., he picked up another passenger. This time it was a man in a dark suit standing perfectly still under a broken streetlight. Daniel pulled over reluctantly. The man entered without speaking, his face obscured by the shadows of his hat. "Where to?" Daniel asked, his voice trembling just slightly. The man raised his head, revealing hollow, sunken eyes that didn't seem to reflect light. He gave an address Daniel instantly recognized. It was the cemetery on the edge of town. Daniel hesitated. Surely the man was joking, or maybe drunk. But when he glanced in the mirror, he saw the man's expression. Cold, unwavering, and deathly serious. Against every instinct screaming at him to refuse, Daniel started the engine and drove. The ride was suffocating. The man never blinked, never shifted, just sat rigidly, staring straight ahead. The silence pressed against Daniel's ears, making every creak of the car feel amplified. When they finally arrived at the cemetery gates, Daniel turned to say something, to ask if the man was sure. But once again, the back seat was empty. This time, however, the door handle was frozen in the locked position. It had never opened. Daniel's chest tightened, and his skin prickled with goosebumps. He slammed the accelerator, speeding away from the cemetery as though chased by unseen forces. That night marked the beginning of a series of ghostly encounters. Night after night, Daniel found himself picking up passengers who shouldn't exist, people who disappeared mid-ride, who whispered addresses to places long abandoned, or who left behind a scent of decay and cold that lingered in the car long after they were gone. Word of his strange experiences began to spread among fellow drivers. Some laughed, dismissing it as stress-induced hallucinations. Others warned him to stop driving at night altogether, saying he was being chosen by restless souls. Daniel himself didn't know what to believe. All he knew was that something had attached itself to him, and each ride pulled him deeper into a nightmare he couldn't escape. Daniel's nights became an endless cycle of fear and anticipation. Every time he started the engine, he wondered, who will I carry tonight? His car, once just a tool for making a living, now felt like a cursed vessel traveling between two worlds, the living and the dead. He tried cleansing it, spraying perfumes, hanging charms on the mirror, even visiting a priest who sprinkled holy water on the dashboard. But nothing worked. The air inside remained cold, and the strange passengers kept coming. One night, around 3:15 a.m., Daniel picked up a child. At first, he thought he was hallucinating. A boy, no older than 10, stood barefoot on the corner of an empty intersection. His pajamas were soaked as though he had been standing in the rain, though the streets were dry. Against all reason, Daniel pulled over. "Are you lost, kid?" he asked, voice shaking. The boy silently climbed into the back seat. His small hands trembled as he whispered an address. Home. Daniel drove carefully, looking into the rearview mirror every few seconds. The boy's face was pale, his lips bluish, as though drained of life. When Daniel tried asking questions, "Where are your parents? Do they know you're out here?" the boy never responded. The address he had given led to a neighborhood Daniel hadn't visited in years. He slowed as he recognized the street. Years ago, he had read about a tragic fire that claimed several lives here, including a child. The house they arrived at was nothing more than a burned shell. Its walls blackened and roof collapsed. Heart-pounding, Daniel turned to tell the boy they had arrived. But the seat was empty. No door had opened. Yet again, a presence lingered, the faint smell of smoke filling the car, and a child's voice echoing faintly. "Home!" Daniel pulled over and stumbled out of the car, gasping for air. He swore he saw shadows moving inside the ruins of the house, flickering like flames. That was the moment he realized it. He was not just giving rides. He was being pulled into the unfinished stories of restless souls. Each passenger was tied to a tragedy, a death, an unresolved ending. And somehow, they were choosing him as their driver. The thought consumed him. He stopped socializing, avoided phone calls, and even distanced himself from his family. He couldn't explain the horror he was living through. No one would believe him. He became obsessed with researching local tragedies, reading old newspapers, and marking the spots where his ghostly passengers appeared. What he discovered chilled him to the core. Every single passenger he had picked up matched someone who had died violently, tragically, or mysteriously in those exact places. The young woman in the pale dress had died in a car accident on that very road years ago. The man in the dark suit was buried in the cemetery he asked to be driven to. The child in pajamas? He had perished in the house fire Daniel had just seen. It was no coincidence. They were real, and they wanted something, but what? And Daniel's fear turned into obsession. He felt an invisible chain pulling him deeper into the realm of the dead. Every night, his rides became more intense, more terrifying. He began hearing whispers even before passengers entered. The static of his radio sometimes formed words, and his rearview mirror showed glimpses of figures sitting behind him, even when the seats were empty. One night, as the clock struck 3 a.m., he picked up a woman drenched in water. Her hair clung to her face, dripping onto the seat. She said nothing at first, only breathed heavily as if struggling. Finally, she gasped an address, a bridge known for suicides. Daniel's blood turned to ice. As he drove, the car grew damp, his clothes sticking to his skin as though he too had been submerged in water. When he finally glanced into the rearview mirror, her face was clear. Pale lips, lifeless eyes, and a river weed tangled in her hair. She had drowned. When they arrived at the bridge, Daniel braked hard. The woman leaned forward slightly, whispering, "You see me, don't you?" Her voice was broken, like bubbles rising through water. Before Daniel could answer, she vanished, leaving the seat wet. Daniel touched the fabric. It was soaked through, impossible to explain away. That night, he didn't return home. He parked by the river, staring at the black water, wondering why he had been chosen. Why not another driver? Why not someone else? He thought about quitting, abandoning the job entirely. But deep inside, he felt trapped. Every attempt to avoid night shifts was thwarted by circumstances. Bills piling up, unexpected expenses, mechanical failures that forced him back to work. It was as if unseen hands were keeping him on the road. Then came the encounter that broke him. A man in military uniform hailed him near the outskirts of town. He looked disoriented, his uniform torn and blood-stained. Daniel instinctively knew this was no living passenger. Still, he opened the door, as if compelled. The soldier muttered coordinates, not an address, his voice echoing like it came from a tunnel. Daniel drove for miles, ending up at an abandoned barracks. When he turned around, the soldier was gone. In his place lay a single dog tag on the seat. Daniel picked it up with trembling hands. For the first time, an object remained after the ghost disappeared. The name on the tag was real. He searched it later and discovered it belonged to a man who had died decades earlier, under mysterious circumstances. This was no hallucination, no dream. This was proof. The dog tag became Daniel's anchor to reality. He carried it everywhere, a reminder that the encounters weren't just figments of his imagination. But with proof came greater fear. If the dead could leave something behind, what else were they capable of? Could they harm him, drag him with them into their world? His health began to deteriorate. He grew pale, lost weight, and his eyes developed dark circles. Sleep offered no escape. His dreams were filled with ghostly passengers demanding rides, clawing at the windows, pulling at the wheel. He often woke screaming, drenched in sweat. Yet he couldn't stop driving. Every night the compulsion grew stronger. He felt watched, even at home. Shadows lingered in the corners of his apartment, and faint knocks echoed on his door at odd hours. He realized the truth he had been avoiding. It wasn't the taxi that was cursed. It was him. The dead had chosen Daniel as their ferryman, their driver between worlds. He was no longer just a man earning a living. He had become part of something far darker. One night, he tried resisting. He left his car parked and stayed inside, lights off, pretending he wasn't home. Around midnight, he heard the sound of a car horn outside. Curious and terrified, he peeked through the blinds. His taxi was idling on the street, headlights on, engine running. But he hadn't started it. The backseat light flickered on, and he saw silhouettes inside, shifting, waiting. Daniel collapsed to the floor, covering his ears as whispers filled the room. Drive, drive. The next night, he gave in. He drove until dawn, carrying passenger after passenger, each one a soul lost in tragedy. Some wept, some screamed, some stared silently, their presence draining him with every mile. He stopped keeping track of time, of places, of reality. He had become a vessel for the dead, a driver with no destination. And then, one night, he met the final passenger. It was close to 4 a.m. the hour when the streets were utterly silent, when even the city seemed to hold its breath. Daniel saw her standing at the same spot where it had all begun, the young woman in the pale dress. Only this time, she wasn't staring blankly. She was smiling. He pulled over without hesitation. She entered the back seat, her presence colder than ever, but her voice clearer. "You've been carrying us well." Daniel's chest tightened. "Why me?" he asked, his voice trembling. She leaned closer, her reflection finally visible in the mirror, though distorted like a face seen through water. "Because you listen, because you see us. Most drivers pass us by, pretending we don't exist. But you opened your door." Daniel felt tears sting his eyes. "What do you want from me?" Her smile widened, but it wasn't kind. "You are one of us now. You've driven too far to return." Before he could respond, the world around him seemed to shift. The streets darkened, the lamps flickered out, and the car felt like it was moving through a tunnel with no end. Shadows filled the windows, pressing against the glass, whispering his name. Daniel realized the horrifying truth. He wasn't driving through the city anymore. He was driving through the realm of the dead, carrying passengers who would never leave. His fate was sealed. Conclusion. Daniel's story is a chilling reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. He began as a simple driver, a man just trying to make a living. But by allowing the dead into his car, he became bound to their endless journey. His tale warns us of the unseen forces that linger in the spaces between life and death, and of the dangers of curiosity and compassion when facing the unknown. The moral is clear. Sometimes kindness can tether you to a fate darker than you can imagine. And sometimes the living aren't the only ones searching for a ride home. If you ever find yourself driving late at night and see a lone figure waiting by the roadside, ask yourself, are you brave enough to stop? Thank you for watching this video. We ask that you subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, activate the notification bell to be alerted about our posts. See you in the next video.
Conclusão. A história de Rafael nos lembra que há mistérios que vão além da nossa compreensão. Muitos acreditam que espíritos presos entre mundos buscam apenas um último gesto de compaixão, um sinal de que não foram esquecidos. Mas também nos alerta para algo mais profundo. Será que estamos preparados para carregar as dores que não nos pertencem? O Uber do além é mais do que uma lenda urbana. É um lembrete de que nas noites escuras e solitárias, a linha entre o real e o sobrenatural pode se tornar quase invisível. E talvez, da próxima vez que você chamar um carro de aplicativo de madrugada, alguém já esteja esperando por você, alguém que não pertence mais a este mundo. Moral da história: nem toda corrida começa com um clique no celular. Algumas começam com um chamado que vem das sombras.